All right, guys. So we got to talk about Jen Psaki and her show on MSNBC. That as time moves on, less and less and less people are watching. Okay, her show is falling off a cliff, so she's getting desperate in drumming up conspiracy theories about the GOP trying to recruit Muslims to attack trans people. Yes, this is what they are pushing on MSNBC. Okay, they're peddling this type of nonsense. And once again, we have Democrats openly admitting out loud what they think about minorities who are not white. Okay, they think that you do not have the ability to think for yourself, that you're being tricked, you're being brainwashed into certain beliefs. When clearly in this situation right here, when we have Muslims and the issue of transgender people, whatever, that's not the case, right? It's clearly not the case. But hey, Jen Psaki wants you to think that Muslims are being recruited by the white supremacists in the GOP. So without further ado, let's go ahead and react to this, because this is extremely, extremely, extremely silly.
So lately I've been noticing the reemergence of a very old GOP playbook that harkens back to President Richard Nixon's infamous Southern strategy. During his campaign for president in 1968, the Republican Party made a concerted effort to reach white Southerners who used to vote for Democrats by playing to their fears of African Americans and the civil rights movement. And it worked. By pitting one group of Americans against another, the GOP successfully managed to split off Southern whites from the Democratic Party.
You know what's funny about that, right? It's very debatable whether or not that worked, because the GOP did not win a majority of the congressional seats in the South until the late 1980s/1990s. You also had Republican presidents like Dwight D. Eisenhower. Even after he supported the Civil Rights Act, he still won votes in the South. Okay, I mean, Republicans, for the most part, had been pro-civil rights even during that time period, and they were still competitive in the South. Okay, they were competing in southern states. However, Nixon did lose the South. Okay, but Jimmy Carter came back in 1976. He's a Democrat, and he swept the South. He won the South. Okay, so again, I'm trying to figure out exactly how this southern strategy flipped the South for Republicans when it took 30 or 40 years for the congressional South to actually be Republican, and you had Democrats winning the South even after Nixon. Okay, and I think it's debatable whether or not the Southern strategy actually caused the states to flip. Okay, which is what they say, but that's not what this video is about. Okay, I just want to say that what she's saying there is actually debatable. Okay, Democrats want you to think that Republicans recruited racists. And that's what allowed Republicans to flip the South, which I don't think there's that much evidence to support that, but this is what they say.
Now, decades later, the right wing is reviving that same playbook, this time with Muslim Americans and trans people.
Yeah, so again, I'm trying to figure out exactly what she's saying here, okay? She's saying that the Muslims are bigots, okay? And the GOP is trying to use the bigotry of Muslims in order to get them to attack trans folks. Is that what she's saying? Who knows? But let's listen.
Hear me out here. The GOP is trying to recruit Muslim Americans, a community that makes up less than 2% of the U.S. population, against another tiny marginalized group of Americans, transgender people. It's important to remember that back in 2011, during the Republican primary, the right wing had designated Muslim Americans as public enemy number one. No surprise, given that conspiracy theorists, remember the birthers? I do, had been trying for years to portray President Obama as a Trojan horse for Sharia law. Republican after Republican candidate ginned up fear about the fabricated threat posed by an Islamic legal doctrine debated by scholars for centuries. To them, the imaginary prospect of Sharia law in this country was scarier than gun violence, climate change, and more important to discuss than, say, millions of people who didn't have health care.
I do not believe in Sharia law in American courts. I believe in American laws in American courts.
If we think that there is an undermining now Just wait if Sharia is adopted or utilized by justices in the United States.
Accepting Sharia in the United States would be the end of our civilization as we know it. No jurisdiction will tolerate having Sharia imposed in the United States of America.
Now, here's the thing, right? I guess you could ask the question of, was that actually really needed, right? Was that type of rhetoric needed? I guess you could debate that, but what they said was a fact, right? What they said was true, okay? Yeah, we don't want Sharia law in the United States. I'm not sure what's so controversial about saying that, but, I tend to believe that at, a time period in which, justifiably so, considering what happened with 9/11, you did have Americans who, were skeptical of Islam and, what Muslims actually believe. So I get it, right? I understand why people have questions about that potentially being imported into this country, especially consider how, we're taking in refugees and stuff like that from these countries. Yeah, I think it's legitimate to ask these questions. I think it's legitimate to have these conversations. I mean, look what's happening in France, okay? They basically imported the Middle East, and now that country has turned into the Middle East, right? And, who knows? Maybe that would have been prevented if they were having these types of conversations before where they was like, hey, look, is this something that we really want, right? Do we really want to be importing all these people in our country? We don't really know whether or not their belief systems really align with our belief systems and whether or not they can coexist. That's a legitimate conversation to be had, right? There's nothing controversial about saying that we don't want Sharia law, right? There's nothing bigoted about saying that. The same way there's nothing bigoted about saying that, hey, we don't want kids talking to teachers about sex or teachers talking to kids about sex. We don't want, kids getting, sex change operations, stuff like that. Nothing controversial, right? Nothing controversial about it. But again, Jen Psaki wants to make it seem like it's racist. It's racist to state a fact, which is that, hey, Sharia law is not going to work in the United States. We don't want that here, right? I mean, come on now.
The end of our civilization as we know it, he says. Of course, there was no chance Sharia law was going to be implemented in the United States. Now, Trump's origin story is the birther movement is a part of that. But all of this also set the stage for him to make this declaration as a candidate in 2015.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Now, fast forward 8 years, and the right wing has focused their fear-mongering on trans people. And who better to go after the new enemy than the old enemy? Consider this from 2015.
We cannot be the warehouse of all these, Muslim people coming from these far-flung lands where, we're just not going to be able to control who becomes radicalized, who doesn't, because of technology. It's impossible.
Now, if you can believe it, Laura Ingraham is rallying Muslims against books in schools with LGBTQ plus themes.
Us Catholics and other Christians, other people of faith have been waiting for the Muslims to step up on this issue.
Wait, so well, here's the thing. Does that mean that the GOP has evolved, right? I mean, isn't that what you want? Okay, isn't that what you want? Okay, maybe some people realize, through, these issues that, hey, maybe there's not that much that makes us different. Okay, maybe we have some differences in regards to our outlook on life, right? And maybe some, differences in regards to how we practice our religion. But maybe, just maybe, right, some people, right, in the GOP or conservatives have realized that, hey, maybe these people aren't that much different, okay? At least the ones that aren't radicalized, maybe they're not that much different, right? Maybe they can be an ally in, certain issues, right? I mean, I don't see what's wrong with that. But, hey, Jen Psaki thinks that this is, there's something wrong with this. I don't understand.
In an interview later with Semaphore, Laura Ingram's guest, who you just saw on the screen, couldn't believe how ironic this all is. He said, quote, 5 years ago, Laura was saying we shouldn't have Muslims in this country. Now she's saying, thank God the Muslims are here. Just to summarize, the right-wingers, the conspiracy theorists, the birthers, they now want us to forget the years they spent fear-mongering about Muslims and Islam. 10 years ago, standing against Sharia law was the key GOP litmus test. Now that litmus test seems to be how fervently you oppose transgender people.
Well, it's not about opposing transgender people. It's about opposing the radical agenda that's being pushed by people on the left, right, like Jen Psaki, where you're allowing LGBTQ books with explicit material in school, right? It's about the policy. Again, you notice how they never focus on policy when it comes to these issues. They just want to say, well, you're opposed to transgender people, but they don't talk about, okay, like what are the actual policies? Because again, there's been no call to ban transgender people from the United States. There's been no legislation, no serious legislation to ban people from being able to be trans, right? From being able to get the operation if you're an adult. There's been no legislation to ban that. But again, they keep trying to say that the GOP is attacking trans people, when the reality is, if GOP was actually really attacking trans folks, there would be legislation to say, hey, you know what? We're outlawing sex change operations, right? You can't get sex change operations, and we're actually going to kick trans people out of the country. That's exactly what banning or outlawing or attacking trans people would be. But again, that's not happening. So therefore, they never talk about the policies, because if they talked about the policies that the GOP is opposed to, her viewers would actually agree with the GOP, right? So what she does is that she just says, well, they're attacking trans people, without being very specific about what exactly is the issue that conservatives have. But again, as you see here, listen to the way she's framing this conversation. Oh, Muslims can't think for themselves, right? Muslims are opposed to, their kids being taught about sex in school and all this other stuff because the GOP has recruited them, right? So again, she's either saying one or two things, okay? The Muslims are the same as the quote-unquote racist whites in the South that the GOP recruited, okay? This is what she's saying. This is the same type of bigotry. It's either that, or what she's saying is that Muslims, again, can't think for themselves, right? No minority is able to make their own decisions. They're being tricked, right? They're being tricked into, being opposed to, some of these things that have been phrased as, or that have been marketed as transgender rights.
Just listen to what Trump himself had to say about that. Even he doesn't exactly know why he's attacking them.
It's amazing how strongly people feel about that. You see, I'm talking about cutting taxes. People go like that. Talk about transgender. Everyone goes crazy. Who would have thought 5 years ago you didn't know what the hell it was?
Well, yeah, because things have changed, right? 5 years ago, this stuff wasn't being pushed in schools, right? 5 years ago, we weren't having, so many kids come out and identify with this movement, okay? And now, again, there's this push to allow them to just get whatever type of sex change operations and hormones they want. Again, a lot of this stuff wasn't as prevalent as it was 5 years ago. Now that it's so prevalent, now that's why you're seeing the pushback.
So what you just heard in that video, that sounds an awful lot like and reminiscent of what George Wallace, a staunch segregationist, once told a newspaper editor. Quote, I tried to talk about good roads and good schools and all of these things that have been part of my career, and nobody listened. And then I began talking about Black people and they stomped the floor. So let's be clear. This is the same old GOP playbook, another cynical ploy to tear at the fabric of our society and damage the idea that out of many, we are one, all because they want so desperately to regain the...
What Jen Psaki here is missing is that we're talking about policies, right? When I make videos that have anything to do with trans people, for the most part, I'm dealing with policies, okay? I'm not dealing with the fact that they're trans, right? I don't really have an issue unless it's a child, right? If a person is trans, I don't care, right? What I'm dealing with is either some insane thing that they're saying or some policy that they're pushing. I don't care about their actual identity as a trans person. But again, Jen Psaki here, because, she's a propagandist, this is the type of stuff that she's pushing, okay? She's pushing myths, right, about the Southern strategy, okay? And she also, again, is playing up this old Democrat strategy, which is to imply that certain minority groups or minority groups in general can't think for themselves, right? They can't think for themselves. The GOP must be brainwashing them and tricking them into going along or to agreeing with the GOP, right? It can't be that Muslims, based off their faith, based off what's in their holy book, they're opposed to some of the stuff that's been pushed on their kids in school. It can't be that. It has to be that the GOP is actively recruiting them. I don't think that the GOP is actively recruiting Muslims. I think that Muslims just realize that, hey, you know what? Maybe some of our values and certain issues, we align with conservatives more so than liberals and Democrats, because again, a lot of Muslims do come over and they vote Democrat, but they realize that, hey, the Democrat agenda has gone so far left, is going so extreme that it is in direct opposition to our faith and our beliefs. So, I mean, again, you know, Jen Psaki can't acknowledge that though, right? She's not going to acknowledge that this stuff is so extreme that that's why you have these Muslims that are revolting against it. No. It's the GOP tricking them. Okay, the GOP tricked Muslims in becoming transphobes, right? According to Jen Psaki. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.